London, August 1992. John Major summons the main players in the Yugoslav crisis to an emergency conference. The aim is to chart a path to lasting peace. The result is diplomatic failure.
They're not actually going to gain. Would everyone take their seats, please? We will commence in 2 minutes.
As the new presidency of the European Community, Britain held out high hopes for peace. The United Nations and the world's leading powers believed they would force all sides to withdraw from land seized. The Bosnian president Ali Izetbegovic was there, his capital Sarajevo under siege by Serb forces. There was Franjo Tudjman, the president of Croatia, 1/3 of his country now under Serb control. And Milan Panic, the new prime minister of what was left of Yugoslavia. But most attention at the London conference was on Slobodan Milosevic, the Serb president. Milosevic had promised his people a greater Serbia. An autocrat dressed up as a nationalist, he convinced Serbs living in Bosnia and Croatia to share his dream. Milosevic masterminded Serb attacks which so shocked the rest of Europe. He backed his henchmen as they began the forcible removal of non-Serbs. But Milosevic claimed to have no influence over the horrors that were unfolding. To the London conference, the Serb side brought their old communist ways and dirty tricks. Milosevic's delegation wired up a senior minister from the Yugoslav government to bug talks involving John Major and Yugoslav Prime Minister Panic. British security detected the radio signals.
These are matter of facts, you just stated them, they're accurate. I mean, these are communists, what do you expect of them? I mean, this is a whole life communist of 60 years old. You think that just because he says he's a Democrat, that he's a Democrat, even if he wants to be a Democrat, he can't be because he thinks as a communist.
For the British peer, Lord Carrington, the London conference marked the end of his fruitless 11-month search for peace. We now know Lord Carrington's efforts shuttling around the Balkans were doomed from the start. Lord Carrington was diplomatic in public, but frequently exasperated and furious in private. He dealt with Balkan politicians who talked of democracy, but believed in absolute power. They shook hands on ceasefires, but kept pressing ahead with their territorial ambitions. They ran circles around European community negotiators. In Western minds, communism has disappeared. The reality Western peace mediators discovered was different. When they came to President Milosevic's office here in Belgrade, to Zagreb, or to Sarajevo, they found that the old communist mentality and apparatus live on. What Western peace delegations saw as negotiation was seen by politicians here as part of a power play, where deception has a pivotal role.
Well, I think I found very quickly that you really couldn't rely on what they said. They were quite prepared to sign any bit of paper that you put in front of them without the smallest intention of doing anything about it. And, you know, after a couple of times of a ceasefire, a couple of times we got ceasefire and so on, one realized that they were thoroughly unreliable people and that they were out for their own agenda.
The greatest victim in communism is the truth. So basic that when I spoke to them, the freedom to speak is confused with freedom to lie. So those people were lying because they felt they are free to do so under our new democratic system.
We need peace, all of us, for Yugoslavia.
EC governments were naive. They believed that diplomacy would force the warring parties to see sense, that democracy would end the hatred.
The politicians of European community who used to deal with the surpluses of butter and I don't know what for the agricultural products, suddenly they got, we would say, a hot potato in their hands, par excellence.
From the start, the West had misread the aims and the tactics of Balkan politicians.
I think that they had very firm ideas about how to stay in power. They all are still in power. And they're pretty ruthless people. And they were prepared really basically to pull the wool over your eyes if they could.
You've used words like liars and deceivers. I mean, would you care to use that on air?
Oh, they certainly lied and certainly deceived. Yes, they did, yeah.
The Hague, September 1991. In one part of the Dutch Foreign Ministry, Lord Carrington chaired peace talks on Croatia. He knew already he was negotiating from a weak position. Lord Carrington had no way to force the protagonist to take the talks seriously. Elsewhere in the building was a second meeting. Europe's foreign ministers debated a French proposal to send troops to stop fighting in Croatia.
A peacekeeping mission can be soldiers and they have to be armed.
The outcome of this meeting of the Western European Union set the line for Western diplomacy throughout the war.
We wanted to interpose. We wanted that the decision should be taken by international community, both the European or subsequently the United Nations, so that reason should prevail, combats would cease, ceasefire would be really put into force, and we needed force to interpose and to maintain that ceasefire.
The suggestion opened a tense behind-the-scenes debate on whether to send or at least threaten force. Planners drew up options to deploy up to 30,000 troops. France pressed for action, Britain objected. The foreign ministers quietly killed the option of military intervention.
I remember, it is no secret, Douglas Hurd saying in The Hague, don't forget it's going to be a civil war. We know what a civil war is, what fighting cities are. We have experience. We have had experience for several years in Northern Ireland. Let's think it twice before we improvise an intervention.
The only thing which would have guaranteed that peace with justice would have been an expeditionary force, creating, if you like, a new Northern Ireland, being there for how many years? And no government has at any time seriously proposed that. And that, I think, is a line which should run through any analysis, because it cuts out so much of the rhetoric which has bedeviled this.
The absence of any credible Western threat of force gave the Serbs new encouragement. As autumn wore on, the Serbs turned their guns on the historic Croatian city of Dubrovnik. Some of the peace negotiators saw the failure to use force this early in the war as a major error.
Oh, I'm convinced that the threat of the use of force would have made, if it had been done in time, would have made things much more easier.
Force is the ultimate arbiter. And any diplomatic policy that does not rely on carrots and sticks will not really get you very far. Without a club in the closet, without a credible threat of force, policy becomes bluff, bluster.
How impossible was it for you then not to have that threat of force in the closet?
Well, it never helped.
We now know that from the start, European governments had made a cold calculation. At the Foreign Office in London and in other capitals, unity among the 12 EC nations mattered above all else.
And I think this may well be coming to a head. Bill, is this the...
Well,
decisions on Yugoslavia were always a European compromise, watered down to the lowest common denominator.
Are reconfiguring our operations to make it shine better than before, including sending the decision-making down to Kislyak.
But unity meant weakness and policies with little chance of ending the war.
Both mattered, finding a peace, stopping Serb aggression, and unity. But when the chips were down, unity came first.
And did that, in your view, limit how far the international community, the politicians, were prepared to go?
Unquestionably.
My impression was that the West, in trying to decide whether to intervene militarily or not, they were primarily interested in the cost-benefit analysis. In other words, how many dead bodies would have to be returned back. And when they came to the conclusion, I think, especially military people, that it would have been too dangerous from their point of view, that there was no chance of any big intervention.
By December 1991, the Carrington Peace Mission faced what it saw as an enemy from within the EC's own ranks. German Foreign Minister Genscher pressed for the immediate recognition of Slovenia and, more crucially, Croatia as states independent of Yugoslavia. The EC had already agreed the principle. The dispute was over the speed.
Genscher was explaining that he was under extreme pressure of his opinion, that there was no reason, no objective reason to prevent Croatia from becoming independent. Never forget that the vast majority of the Yugoslavs who are living in Germany are of Croatian stock.
What was the French position on this?
The French was, do not rush too fast.
In this letter to the EC, Lord Carrington warned that early recognition of Croatia would undoubtedly mean the breakup of the peace conference. He also predicted this might well be the spark that sets Bosnia-Herzegovina alight. Germany dismissed Carrington's warnings. The 12 EC nations agreed unanimously to recognize Croatia, even though many remained disturbed by Genscher's pressure.
We had a rough night about timing. I've never understood why this is thought to be a crucial turning point. It would have been better to wait a few more weeks, but that's a tactical regret. I don't believe that that decision to recognize reality in Croatia and Slovenia altered the situation.
Had we vetoed the decision, we would have burst and totally destroyed the efforts that we were making on the Maastricht Treaty and on political union.
Croatia celebrated its independence. The Serb government believed the EC had taken sides with Croatia. Lord Carrington was furious. In his words, the EC had shot my horse.
Well, recognition, of course, torpedoed the peace conference, because the basis on which the peace conference was arranged was that there should be no recognition of any of the 6 republics until all 6 republics had agreed on an ultimate solution to which they were all agreeable. And, of course, recognizing 2 countries removed all leverage.
Neighboring Bosnia was now in an impossible position. The Muslims in this multi-ethnic republic were determined to gain total independence from Belgrade. The Bosnian Serbs were equally determined to stay within a greater Serbia. The slide into war began, just as Lord Carrington and many diplomats had predicted. For the West, recognition of Bosnia was the least worst option.
We thought that there was an outside possibility that recognition of Bosnia would convince the Serbs to be careful about supporting the separatism of the Bosnian Serbs. As it turned out, we were unable to convince the Serbs that there would be international action, that there would be international intervention.
A miscalculation?
No, I think just it was an attempt to have an impact, and the attempt failed.
Television coverage of those events journalists were brave enough to witness kept the horror of Bosnia in the public eye.
Some people in Sarajevo believe that a monster
20 people queuing for bread were killed today.
Eyewitnesses say 3 mortar shells landed where people were lined up in the street to get bread.
Many diplomats cursed television coverage. Images like this mortaring of a young child's funeral created the something must be done syndrome.
It's not enough to say something must be done. It's instinctively, when we see terrible pictures on our television screens, we feel something must be done. But it's the duty of governments to work out very clearly and coolly what can be done and what they're ready to make available to help that thing be done.
Images of aid planes flying into Sarajevo confirmed Western action on the humanitarian front. But in the search for peace, governments stuck rigidly to their original lowest risk policy. By early summer 1992, the Bosnian Serbs controlled 2/3 of Bosnian territory. The mainly Muslim town of Gorazde had been under siege for 3 months. There were widespread claims of murder, rape, and the forcible removal of people from their homes.
Mr. Major, Mr. Major, what progress on Yugoslavia? What progress?
By now, Lord Carrington's peace efforts had stalled.
The best thing that's happened today is they've all 3 turned up.
In July last year, Britain took over the EC presidency, and with it, the poisoned chalice of Bosnia. When he flew to Sarajevo, the Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, was visibly anxious. The EC had to keep negotiating, even though peace seemed as elusive as ever. The British presidency would soon call the joint conference with the UN for London in late August. It raised hopes that diplomacy might find a new way to peace. By this time, Lord Carrington believed it could not.
I gave up at that particular moment. I resigned, largely because I thought that there was no solution to it. I mean, my efforts had been, as I thought, undercut, and I didn't think that there was the prospect in the near future of an agreement. But it was quite obvious we had to go on trying.
Ahead lay more diplomacy and more deceit. Bigger promises, even bigger lies. Northern Bosnia. August 1992. The world is outraged by these television images of Bosnian Serb detention camps. The London conference was convened 3 weeks later, partly to force the Bosnian Serbs to close the camps. Diplomats believed the Bosnian Serb army had overstretched itself. Their leader, Radovan Karadzic, bought time by offering to hand over 1/5 of the land they occupied.
Serbian side is ready to negotiate the territorial questions.
The Balkan leaders signed up to 13 principles to wind down the conflict. As the delegations left to return to the war, the signs were optimistic. There seemed to be a framework for peace.
The Bosnian Serb side recognized that in negotiations between the Bosnian parties, they would agree to withdraw from a substantial portion of the territory now under the control of their forces.
We believe that there was a commitment. We believe that the commitment was one based upon not only principle, but based upon the preservation of a new world order.
But soon, once again, diplomacy would fall victim to Balkan deceit.
I had the feeling that one would go again through all the motions that we had been going for more than a year. And you would have the same round of visits, optimistic assessments, promises made which would not be kept, and that in the meantime the carnage would continue. No, I had a very sad feeling on that day.
It's mainly meetings all day. We have a meeting at 10 with President Izetbegovic, and then at 12 Mr. Boban, and later this afternoon Mr. Karadzic, yesterday.
Lord Owen took over as EC peace negotiator based in Geneva. In many respects, Europe had now passed overall responsibility for brokering peace to the United Nations, represented by Cyrus Vance. Just like Lord Carrington, Lord Owen quickly realized the limits of his mission.
I can't complain to be misled. I discovered very soon into the job, I didn't know it beforehand, but I could guess it, that there was absolutely no case in which they would involve themselves in a military on-the-ground force. And I agree with them, so I'm not complaining. I think that if I'd been in their position, I would have made a similar decision.
The Bush administration and Europe quickly realized that the Bosnian Serbs were not going to honor the London Agreement. We now know that in the autumn of 1992, military action was secretly reconsidered by the West.
History might have taken a different course if the day after the London conference we had started insisting that all the terms of the London Conference Agreement were upheld. There was a serious debate and there was serious concern. We felt even then that the willingness to use force to enforce the terms of the London Conference was probably essential. That was the only thing that the Serbs would really respect.
The idea foundered. Britain and France did not want their troops on the ground endangered by Serb reprisals if the Americans launched air attacks. Instead, the West opted for being pushed around by the warlords like General Ratko Mladic, the Bosnian Serb commander. Mladic worked out precisely the limits to Western action. His forces continued to drive Muslims from land which the Bosnian Serbs believed was theirs by right. Diplomacy was no match for such pathological hate.
Islamski svet, radi toga što oni nemaju atomsku bombu, ali imaju demografsku bombu koja je opasnija od atomske. Atomsko oružje je pod nekakvom kontrolom, a ovo njihovo ogromna reprodukcija nije ni pod kakvom kontrolom. I oni gdje god dođu vrlo brzo, jedan muškarac sa 5-6 žena, on začas rodi selo. Naprave džamiju i eto vam sela.
There was hate on all sides. Mladic boasted to us, "In this war, I make all the first moves." Western officials concede that General Mladic outsmarted them.
Knowing, as we did, that we were not prepared to make a massive military commitment, that really did tie our hands. It was quite clear that the Serbs understood that as well, and they did use this to their advantage.
The general traveled to Geneva as the silent figure in the Bosnian Serb delegation. Mladic's lack of respect for Western mediation deepened each time he met with the Owen-Vance team.
Sa kompleksom određenim sam otišao u Ženevu jer sam smatrao da su tamo veliki svetski autoriteti koji dobro poznaju ovu situaciju i koji je mogu rešiti. Iskusni ljudi u diplomatiji, kakav je recimo gospodin Cyrus Vance, koga izuzetno cenim, i mnogi saradnici sa njim. Međutim, ja sam kroz ta 2-3 boravka u Ženevi sagledao da oni nisu u dovoljnoj meri shvatili uzroke krize na ovim prostorima.
In public, the Vance-Owen process was the only hope for a lasting peace.
So in your judgment,
the controversial map published in January this year divided Bosnia into 10 multi-ethnic regions.
Has a Croatian majority. So this is a trick. And we should not accept it. Yeah.
It would be a moral settlement in line with the 13 principles of the London Conference. We now know that in private, by mid-February, virtually no government gave the map any chance of success. One senior British official told us, Vance-Owen was a carcass of dead policies, but we had to cling to something. In private, even Lord Owen doubted it would work.
The real criticism of the Vance-Owen plan, which I would have made if I'd been outside it, was that it was too idealistic, that it expected too big a rollback of an army that had not been defeated, and that in a sense it was the ideal solution, but that was the solution we were asked by the London Conference to try and get.
This plan was predicated on a fairly large-scale peacekeeping force on the ground. When it became clear that those troops would not be forthcoming, the plan suffered a near-fatal blow.
It was a mirage from the beginning. It was something that could not succeed unless there was a will to confront the aggression.
In mainly Muslim towns like Srebrenica, General Mladic's guns shelled tens of thousands of refugees and United Nations troops sent to protect them. Behind the scenes, the Vance-Owen map was already dead. But in public, the map's continued survival gave Serb, Croat and Muslim forces a reason to intensify the fighting and the suffering.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
For the new Clinton administration in America, the brutal truths of Bosnia were forcing a public re-education. During his election campaign, President Clinton had promised decisiveness on the former Yugoslavia. Instead, Europe watched horrified the policy flip-flop here in Washington. At times, European officials wondered whether the Clinton administration even had a basic understanding of who was fighting who in Bosnia, let alone what a suitable policy might be.
Some people, it seemed, had the impression that some Serb
hordes rushed into Bosnia and occupied the land there, and that some local people in Bosnia-Herzegovina were fighting that invading army, which was, of course, not only factually wrong, but created a distorted perspective as to what tactic, what line the international community should be taking.
That was a polite expression of international alarm about the Clinton administration's understanding of Bosnia. In late January at the United Nations, Lord Owen met Clinton's Secretary of State, Warren Christopher. Lord Owen was more blunt about his worries.
Lord Owen, may I ask you to begin by giving us an assessment.
The biggest single group of the Muslims, but
Lord Owen used television to lay out the basic facts of Bosnia to both Clinton and the American public. His tactic helped to sharpen American understanding, but it backfired politically.
They're not happy suddenly to be sold that they have to live in a country called Bosnia-Herzegovina. They were prepared to live in a big country called Yugoslavia.
At the State Department, Lord Owen's public relations offensive alienated Warren Christopher. Washington therefore dismissed the whole idea of the Vance-Owen plan. Recognizing the Muslim plight, America wanted to lift the arms embargo against European wishes.
In our judgment, looking at all of the options, the one that made the most sense to us was lifting the arms embargo. I think that's been a consistent position, and I think we just disagreed.
Europe, however, was exasperated and tried to make sense of the long line of contradictory American policy statements.
This is a European issue. It's an issue for the world community to address.
I think we should act. We should lead. The United States should lead. I think it's something we have to be very skeptical about. We don't want our people in there basically in a shooting gallery. I didn't change my mind. Our allies decided that they weren't prepared to go that far at this time.
In the interests of unity, Europe and Russia waited patiently for America to decide its policy. Warren Christopher visited European capitals for consultations, and Europe kept waiting. This was not the way to frighten the Serbs and force them to surrender territory.
This was really a case in which we dithered and looked at others while we ourselves should have taken our responsibilities. I think we have waited too long and we have underestimated the climate in the United States, where even, I think, President Bush earlier, but now certainly President Clinton, just does not want to send American ground forces to a scenario which he thinks is primarily European.
I don't think that the storyline of Bosnia, from our perspective, is one of flip-flops or changes. I think our view has been pretty consistent.
Meanwhile, sanctions were eroding President Milosevic's political authority in Serbia. He had to be seen to take action to end the war. In Athens, he looked to his Balkan ally, Greek Prime Minister Konstantin Mitsotakis, for help. Under the cover of a hastily called peace conference, Milosevic forced Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb leader, to sign the Vance-Owen map. The move exposed the West's miscalculation about Milosevic. Three days later, he and Mitsotakis took a political risk and traveled to the Bosnian Serb parliament in Pale. Milosevic believed he still had the ultimate power to force the Bosnian Serbs to accept the Vance-Owen map. The West did too. Milosevic failed. General Mladic defied the Serbian president. He appealed to the Bosnian Serbs' fear of losing territory. The delegates rejected the map.
Vi morate shvatiti da smo mi Srbi na svome, ovo je srpska zemlja bila. To su bile srpske šume, rijeke, polja, brda, gradovi. I mi ne osvajamo tuđe, mi branimo naše.
Insiders say Milosevic was enraged by his humiliation. The West was astonished. For a year, they had believed that Milosevic controlled the Bosnian Serbs. Now they discovered the Bosnian Serbs were their own masters.
The West did not make this distinction between influence and control. They did believe, up until Pale, that Milosevic especially, but Milosevic, Osic, Bulatovic, in other words, Serbs from Serbia, could give them orders, could give orders to Serbs over there, which they couldn't.
How much then did the West misjudge the control Belgrade had over the Bosnian Serbs?
Very much.
Serbs, Croats and Muslims turned on each other with a new ferocity and urgency. There was an all-out push for land. The Serbs and the Croats formed an unlikely alliance to shrink Muslim territory. Bosnia would now be divided into 3 ethnic mini-states by way of fighting, not diplomacy. The West threw in the towel. On May the 20th, Russian Foreign Minister Andrei Kozyrev traveled to Washington. The New York Times reported an American leak that the US and Russia had privately agreed a strategy of accepting Serb gains for now. America and Russia seemed to have agreed they would no longer force the Serbs to withdraw. Russia now says it was misled by America.
This is totally inaccurate quotation of what I said and what I thought. From the beginning, I was insisting on a Serbian rollback from those territories which do not belong to them.
Well, the Russians are right. I don't know where the leaks came from or what motivated them or what they were grounded upon. But there was no such agreement between the United States and Russia to, quote, accept Serbian gains.
To be here today with my colleagues, Foreign Secretary.
The modest joint action plan agreed on May the 22nd was sold as a new step towards peace and to protect Muslim-safe areas. In truth, it was an American diplomatic device designed to kill the Vance-Owen plan for good.
That weekend, I knew perfectly well that the Vance-Owen peace plan had gone. We could not recover it. The only question is whether or not I resigned with it. And the difficulty with that is that, it just seemed to me to be a sort of vainglorious thing to do. Walk away, Mr. Pure, slightly tempting, I may say.
So, by June, Lord Owen and fellow negotiator Thorvald Stoltenberg were reduced to haggling on behalf of the Muslims, trying to secure for them land and dignity out of military defeat.
We're being abandoned. We have been more judged by our religion than by our commitment to principles and ideals that we share with the West.
The Serbs and the Croats have by and large got what they wanted. The current carve-up is precisely what governments, diplomats and the London Conference had pledged to prevent.
Pa neće međunarodna zajednica sada sebi da pljune u lice, da tako kažem, i da prizna svoje greške.
An estimated 200,000 people have been killed. More than 2 million people have lost their homes. Diplomacy has lost. Deceit has won.
People have felt humbled and even ashamed.
Diplomacy doesn't settle wars. Diplomacy of itself isn't going to settle it.
I think we Europeans have done the things that we could do, and we've done them well, but they are limited.
On Yugoslavia, everybody lost except the Serbs.